Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm your host Oscar. You can follow the show at MiamiPod on Twitter. TheMiamiPod.com is where you can find the iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and RSS feeds. And for our first episode, we're on Ian's hiatus. We're joined by another NFL Bleacher Report 1000 scout in Charles McDonald, who you can also follow his work at Setting the Edge podcast with Justice Moscato, and has started doing some team off-season reports that are really good. So they'll get to the Dolphins, I think, in a little bit. But I thought we'd have Charles on mainly to talk about Jordan Phillips as it's kind of a player I think is really interesting in terms of like the construction of the team. And then Charles is one of the few people that cares about him and is maybe a little bit higher on him. So I thought it'd be interesting to get his perspective on quite an important player this season with like no real competition for one technique on the roster. And then we'll also get his thoughts on Charles Harris. So how are you doing, Charles? And before I say anything about Phillips and kind of sway the conversation in either direction, what was it about Phillips in like the last year or so that kind of caught your interest in terms of him as a player?
Oh, well, I'm one of those people that kind of looks at, there's some positions on the field where you'll take, I guess, you'll take flashes even if they come with inconsistency. So like defensive end, defensive tackle, like cornerback, I'm okay with some of those if you have the ability to make explosive plays. And I still think that Jordan Phillips has that ability. And that's what I liked from him coming out of Oklahoma. Now, he's not the most consistent guy. And at this rate, he probably will never be the most consistent guy. But it's kind of like the same situation that the Falcons had with have with Rashid Hagan, where, there's going to be some plays that are bad. But on the plays where he's dialed in and focused and really focused on what he needs to do on a certain play and focus on his technique, there's only like a handful of guys in the league that can block him. And like when you look at, I think it was the Rams game last year where Jordan Phillips had some big plays in the run against Todd Gurley and that offensive line, and you see the potentials in a guy who could be a lot better than he is. And I think sometimes it just takes some of these guys a little bit longer to figure out. So I think we're going to year 3 on his career as a second-round pick. And like you said, with Earl Mitchell going to San Francisco, there's not really any competition for him to take over that one technique spot from Ndamukong Suh. So more consistent. That Suh and Phillips can be a scary duo, I think.
Outside of his ball rush, what do you think like his dominant move is? Because to me, it's like that's where like his real flashes, where he's at least his best plays, I think, have been ball rushes. I think the end of last season we saw a couple of times where he could take on a double team or looked kind of competent holding himself up against the run, whereas before, like you would see him like 5 yards down past the line of scrimmage on like goal line plays one-on-one, which is, for someone who's meant to be your nose tackle, to me, like that's the kind of issue I have with him is he can't do the nose tackle stuff. So then to me, that's kind of a waste, or like it's a hard compliment for Suh, who ideally want to be one gapping. I think to get the most out of Suh. So what do you see outside of the ball rush where Phillips can really dominate?
Well, if for Phillips and guys his height, because he's like 6'5", 6'6", it's hard to. You need to constantly be an anchor versus run as a nose tackle. Like that's why you always see the shorter guys end up sticking at that role. But when, like you said, he did start to figure it out a little bit last season, because I think it all starts with where you come from there. Like even like going back to high school, like I haven't watched Jordan Phillips high school stuff, but when you're that big and that overwhelming, you can get away with kind of just standing up straight and trying to see and just kind of bullying your way through everybody. Even even at Oklahoma, he was able to get away with that to a degree too. And when you get to the NFL and you still have that bad habit, it's just never going to work out like that. And I think like towards the back half of last season, you saw a little bit more of a calmer player where he's not trying to, ball snapped. Where's the ball? Where's the ball? Like he learned that, okay, ball snapped. What's the guard or the center in front of me doing? And I need to react off that. It's not, it's not like being a dog and the ball snapped and you have to go chase the ball immediately. You have gap responsibilities and you have to play leverages and techniques. And when you aren't playing those leverages, that's how you end up 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, especially when you're going against those interior linemen. If you're 6'6", 6'5", you're going against guards and centers who are only from like 6'1" to 6'3". That's already a disadvantage you have in your wheelhouse. So if he can just get down and keep his pad level low and stay more consistent in that area of his game, I think you'll see like that has that natural explosion that he has that allows him to make some plays up the field and be disruptive. But it all starts with the pad level for him. And that's just something that big defensive tackles have historically struggled with, just because the height difference is so hard.
And generally it takes like 3-4 years to see that kind of translate. I think like Paul Solai is like a really good comparison in terms of like almost identical bodies. I guess like Paul's probably a bit bigger, but like athletically tested like really similar. And it took him like 4 years until he was like a capable starter really. But I think the difference was he was a bit more stout against the run, but then kind of added more pass rushing stuff to it. Whereas Phillips is kind of the opposite, whereas almost he's more of a pass rusher that you're kind of hoping can learn how to play the run. With his fit against next to Sue, one thing I've always been interested with Miami is like having Sue and Wake, where they just predominantly play one side of the field. Are there other teams around the league that you see kind of mirror with their defensive line? How do you think that kind of limits, or do you think that limits Miami at all with kind of offenses being able to dictate especially the alignment of Sue, whether it's at one technique or free technique, kind of the offensive strong side can get the matchup they want and double team Sue slightly easier. Is there any other teams? I can't really think of anyone that has it so rigidly, but there's not many players that play as many snaps as Sue either.
Yeah, the only team I can think of that was really rigid with their defensive line techniques was like San Francisco, and that was just because they were playing like that archaic 3-4, and the only bodies they had that could really do it were Armstead and Buckner. And like when you only have two guys that can do it, that's gonna hinder you severely. But usually, like you see like especially now where you're rotating so heavily on the long defensive line, you don't really see teams like sticking to this guy on that side, or these guys on one side and these guys on the other side. Usually you see a lot of mixing and matching and stuff like that. So I think that's something the Dolphins definitely need to break away from. And hopefully adding Charles Harris gives them a little bit more flexibility in re-signing Andre Branch too.
I guess it's just like maybe having like old guys that are like happy where they are. But it's interesting like to have two players that like basically have to stand next to each other every snap on the field. It's kind of unique, and especially when it's interesting because like teams won't run at Sue, so that kind of alleviates some pressure on Wake to like have to play the run as much, which is kind of a bonus. But then I'm pretty happy. Like if I was on offense against the Dolphins, I'd be pretty happy just always having Sue as a one technique. Like I think you're going to be happy with that outcome rather than have him one-on-one. But so yeah, it's just interesting. We'll see if they kind of go away from that. But I doubt. I think if they were going to do it, it would have been last year with the change in staff, and now they've set that precedent. I don't think it would really change that much. In terms of like the two, I think there were 7th round picks. The Dolphins brought in, or maybe they were 5th round picks. Both free techniques. Have you watched any of those two guys, and do you think how they kind of really fit in with Miami going from like 2 one techniques with Earl Mitchell and Phillips to now kind of the opposite? Do you think that's just putting more pressure on Phillips to be a base player and then move to more nickel? Or do you think Phillips will still predominantly play nickel, and we'll just see Sue and Phillips play a lot of downs?
I think Phillips is just going to be more of a base player to start off with, but I do like at the same time. I just don't see uh, the real push and competition for him not to be on the field in nickel too. Like I think him starting at one tech is a base, starting at base and one tech is kind of a given right now. And at nickel, I don't see anyone who's going to be like an immediate threat to his playing time as we sit here at the end of May. So I think he's going to end up, for better or worse, being a big part of the Dolphins defense this year. And hopefully you see the flashes that made him intriguing prospect of Oklahoma.
Are you surprised they moved on from Earl Mitchell, especially for $4 million, which was like pretty cheap in considering the free agency market? Maybe they just have more intel on his health, but he looked pretty good when he came, especially those first 2 games back from injury. Do you think that's more a sign that they believe in Phillips, or they just see kind of like the tail end of Mitchell's career coming a bit earlier?
I don't know. That one didn't really make sense to me for like to cut him, just because
It's like 4 million.
Yeah, 4 million is not that much, and you don't really like. I know he was banged up a little bit last year, but when he was in, he was pretty good. And usually, you don't really see teams just let go of quality defensive linemen like that and not have, or at least on the outside looking in, not have a, I guess, solid replacement for that. Maybe they must be pretty high. Yeah, so I guess on the inside of that building, they must be pretty high on Jordan Phillips to think that he can just step in and be that Earl Mitchell caliber player next season. And it's not like Earl Mitchell was, like close to Ndamukong Suh or anything, but he was definitely a quality starting defensive tackle. So if now Jordan Phillips can get that consistency, like I talked about earlier, and be more of a force versus a run, then that could be an option, but he hasn't been consistent enough yet.
Was there a player in this free agency or draft that you would have said was like the ideal partnership for Suh? You were pretty. To me, like Hankins would make a load of sense. Where last year he played a load of free technique, but before they played a lot of one technique, and you could move him over to like kind of how Linval Joseph's been used in Minnesota, and I think that would be really successful. For him, was there someone else that you could think of that would be kind of not only like an upgrade from Phillips, but someone who's like a bit more versatile, or you could do slightly more with next to Suh?
Yeah, I thought. I mean, Hankins, that free agency escapade was
super weird.
Very weird, because I mean, when you look at exactly what the stat was, but he had a stat on Pro Football Focus where it was like some amount of hurry, sacks, and run stuff, and it was him, Aaron Donald, and then Ndamukong Suh, like all in this one category. So when you look at a guy who was 24 years old, the lack of interest he had on the open market was really bizarre, and that's a guy like you want to pair with Ndamukong Suh, just because he's played one tech, and that's when he shined. And then when the Giants signed Damon Harrison over from the Jets, he had to play a little bit more 3-tech, but it's not like he was bad in that role. It's just not his ideal fit. And then when he was able to 1-tech, that's where he shined again. So the lack of interest for him was really weird. But I think Dontari Poe would have been a good fit for what Miami's trying to do, because if you have the rotation of Suh, Poe, and Phillips, that's taking a lot of pressure off Poe that's constantly been on him since his Kansas City days. I mean, back in 2013 and 2014, Dontari Poe, he was playing about 90% of the defensive snaps, which is just ridiculous for somebody who's 345 pounds. So I think if how Atlanta's going to use him, where you get him with a bunch of different bodies and you can kind of rotate him in and out, and maybe you play him 55 or 60% of the snaps instead of 90. So yeah, Hankins and Poe were the two guys that I thought that they might go after they let go of Earl Mitchell, but it never really materialized.
Yeah, they seem to just be fascinated with linebackers, so they're obviously assigning a lot of blame on the linebacker unit, even though then they're retaining Kiko. So
Yeah,
Um,
that was.
and then they're going to play every linebacker, every position. It's going to be interesting. I guess as we move on to Charles Harris, is there anything else on the interior you wanted to touch on with Miami?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. It's going to be interesting to see if it's going to be interesting to see like who comes out of training camp as like the third defensive tackle, I guess, because it seems like open season at that spot.
Or even if they like carry one, maybe they'll start playing like their edge guys inside more. We see like Terrence Viday slide in.
Yeah,
His like first 2 years, that's where he looked his best.
yeah,
And they
he
kind of had a reluctancy to do that.
yeah, he has a body type that would allow him to do that on passing downs, especially.
I maybe should get your thoughts on like Jared Aldrick being a free agent, and like obviously he didn't pan out in Jacksonville, like being asked to two gap a bit more. I was surprised that maybe like Atlanta should like try and take a flyer on him. I think he would be like a really good fit there. Is there anywhere else you could see like Aldrick wanting to like fitting well and being utilized a bit more like the one gapper that he turned out to be, not the two gapper he was kind of drafted to be and then signed as a free agent to be?
I think that the Chargers would be a good landing spot for him, just because they don't really have anybody on the interior who can be a disruptive presence. Because I mean, they're going to play Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram on the outside, and Corey Leger, he signed the big deal a few years ago, but he's not that good. And Brandon Mebane's a solid player, but he's coming off of torn biceps, and also Karan Reed's coming off torn biceps too. So it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. Two guys coming off injury and another guy who just isn't that good. So I think that Audric would be a nice landing spot there, and he's played in the same system because he was just in Jacksonville last year, and now Gus Bradley's the defensive coordinator out in Los Angeles now.
Or maybe that'll be a reason he wouldn't want to go.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't want to go because what happened in Jackson. They had so many of the same body types for the same position, and like they didn't really have any edge rushers besides and whatever Dante Fowler did or did not do at last season. So I think Audric just kind of got lost in the shuffle there with the signings of Malik Jackson, and they extended Aubrey Jones too. So yeah, I do think he's going to find a team before training camp starts, but it's going to be interesting to see where he falls.
I mean, he's probably just happy being on a beach somewhere until after training camp.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Don't blame him. Shall we move on to Charles Harris then? Because I know you were kind of an early proponent of him. And then I think even like Justice has been kind of high on him, even though he doesn't really fit like the Wardo force player kind of ideal. So what was it about that Charles that stood out to you? And why do you think like Missouri players test really badly, so then Twitter hates them?
I don't know. Well, what I liked about Charles Harris was that he had that spin move down packed. And it's really hard to find guys who are coming into the league with counter moves that they're confident in. Because I mean, just from my playing and coaching experience, when you get a guy to use the pass rush move or use one yourself, like you have to be confident that that's something that you're good at and that's something that you can get done and something that you can rely on. And for him to have that, that's more than what a lot of guys can bring into the league. So if you're asking, if you're of the school of thought that guys don't necessarily get better just because they reach an NFL program, I think Charles Harris is one of the more pro-ready pass rushers in the draft. And his combine was really weird because when you watch him on tape, like he looks so much more explosive than he did on than he did at the combine. And what was weird to me was I went back and watched like the combine field drills that they had, and he looked good in the field drills.
Yeah, in the like linebacker drills, he didn't look too bad.
Yeah, but the combine numbers just didn't translate. And even like at his pro day, he improved on his times and his jumps, but even then, it still wasn't great for somebody his size. And that just kind of makes you think about what is happening at Missouri when you look at guys who have been productive in the league. So you have Shane Ray, Marcus Golden, I think was like third in the league in sacks this year. Alden Smith, he was more athletic than those other two, but he didn't quite blow the doors off the combine. You have Jaquez Smith down in Tampa Bay, who's been a pretty good situational rusher.
A couple of years ago, he was really good.
Yeah, so I don't know what's going on that makes them not test well at the combine, but still be solid NFL players. I mean, but if he, at the end of the day, if he's a solid player, that's really all that matters, I guess. Like the only player that's the only defensive lineman from Missouri that's really blown up the combine in the past is Sheldon Richardson. And besides that, it's guys like Alden Smith who were above average, and then the rest were just really, really poor. I mean, Shane Ray, he ran a 7.7 3-cone at his pro day, that's worse than what like offensive tackles run, like offensive linemen run. So I don't get it, but these guys tend to end up being solid football players. So maybe Charles Harris is the next in line.
And it's interesting because it's not like they just train at Missouri for the combine. They like go to like the same places in Florida as everyone else, like the IGMs or the IMGs or whatever. So yeah, it's weird. It's not like it just must be something they're like fed or sleeping, doing before the combine, just get weird results. But yeah, his jumps like were a lot more positive. You were talking about his spin move. I guess that's almost been like a criticism of him somewhat, is like he's too reliant on it, or like you see him spin away from running plays quite often. Like to me, like the knock on him against the run is more the zone read, who just looks like his feet are stuck in the ground. But I mean, you're not really playing much zone reads in the NFL, so I don't think you need to worry too much about that. What are your thoughts with him being like a bit too eager to spin? Is that something that you think is like easy to teach, or do you think being able to have the spin move is a better commodity than being like a bit too hasty to use it?
Oh, I think anytime, and this applies for really any position, anytime that you see that a guy has a trait, but he uses it too much, it's a lot easier to get someone to dial something back than it is to teach someone how to do something and then aggressively get them to use it. So if he's using his spin move a little bit too much, I mean, just looking at it as a former defensive line coach, like, okay, you have the spin move down, and that shows that you're confident in using other moves too. So maybe we'll dial the spin move back a little bit, and we'll work on, I don't know, like a swim move or a rip move to the outside or inside move. But I mean, a lot of guys, they'll come into the league and they'll never figure out that inside counter move. And he already has that inside counter move down packed. It's one of his best pass rusher moves. So it's a lot easier for me to say, let's dial it back and teach you something else than to get somebody else to say, come on, spin more, be a little bit more confident. So that's what I like about Charles Harris just from day one.
And he's got that nice outside rip move as well, like almost not like quite as low as Wake or as like violent, but I think at least that's like a good room for him to be in with Wake, and to hopefully like get a bit lower and a bit more like aggression on his rip up. And he goes at the ball quite a bit as well. Once he gets behind the line of scrimmage, it's always like a good sign. I know Matt Waldman always talks about that being like a sign that the game's slowing down for a player when they're trying to get their hands on the ball, not just make the tackle or wrap around. Is there any other kind of like part of his pass rush skill set that you think's like close to being refined or like dangerous?
I think that like one thing that all these guys from Missouri have done well, especially Shane Ray and Marcus Golden, they're really good at, and Charles Harris too, they're really good at timing the snap. And I used to be one of those guys where on Twitter where we're like, oh, he's just a snap jumper. He's just a snap jumper. Well, I mean, that's not really a bad thing when you think about it. If you're not getting offsides penalties, then really an issue. Maybe you may not run a 1.5 10-yard split, but if you can guess when the ball's going to be snapped every single time and give yourself that head start that you need, then you can kind of artificially make up that 10-yard split for yourself. And I think that's what he does. That's another thing that he does really well. And even though his 3-cone time wasn't the best, I still like his ability to bend around the corner. And I think he does have that knack to finish on the sacks. Like he has that closing speed, that burst, like that awareness that you want to see around the edge, through a spin, off a rip move, and I think he's going to be. I think playing on the same line as Ndamukong Suh is going to help him a lot. And if he can get onto the field next to Ndamukong Suh, maybe if Cam Wake comes out for a little bit, then I do think that those are going to be situations that are advantageous for him.
He's going to have quite a bit of competition snap jumping with Suh and Wake on the same lines. Like, you're not really going to be able to tell who's jumping or if it's just Wake flying off. So at least that kind of helps like hide a bit.
Yeah, perception at least.
Yeah. Is there anything else about like against the run? Is there anything you can really do for a player that's just like not really built to like set the edge physically? And then it is just a bit slow with his instincts in terms of reading handoffs or the mesh point. What can you really do other than just having like play a bit more conservatively, play a bit closer to the sideline almost, and give more lateral yards? Is that kind of what you're trying to hope for? Is just hope he gets the offensive lineman on the floor with the early footwork?
Yeah, your main hope there is just going to be. I would say, can we get him to be a little bit stronger so he's not getting blown off the ball like when he's trying to set the edge, because he'll never be a guy that's like 280 pounds setting the edge like that. But that's fine because I mean I don't think anyone's really expecting that. And then, like you said, when you have guys that are aggressive like that, and especially in 2015, who are coming from those like aggressive upfield schemes in college where you're just kind of giving the defensive line a free reign to do whatever the hell they want up the field. You need to just kind of pull that back a little bit. And I don't think he'll ever be a good run defender. I mean, if he ends up being an average run defender, that's a win for Miami. It's all about what he can do rushing the passer. So yeah, he's going to have some ugly run plays this season, but you just kind of know that that's going to be what you get with him at the same time. It's kind of like with Vic Beasley when the Falcons drafted Vic Beasley. I don't think anyone really expected him to be a tremendous run defender, but he's someone that can get after the quarterback in bunches. And I'm not saying that Charles Harris is going to come out here and lead the league in sacks in year 2, but I do think he has the ability to be a guy that consistently hits like 7 to 9 and then have a couple double-digit sack seasons.
Yeah, and I think we've seen like edge rushers like Shelby, OV, and even Branch last year kind of almost be able to create more because of Wake on the other side in particular, or even with like OV that he got a lot of sacks that rookie season of Dion Jordan. Like Dion created like a lot of pressure in the interior on the sides, and then OV was like cleaned up a lot for some reason. Like the secondary pass rushers in Miami are like really productive. It doesn't really matter who it is. It's always been like going back to like Randy Starks and stuff. They've always been like the second, third pass rushers have always been productive. So I think it's like a good spot for him in terms of like the veterans and the kind of talent around him. Is there any other like pass rushers or interior defensive linemen that you think people should watch out for this season that have just been drafted? Who particularly likes? We haven't really got your thoughts on the last draft class.
Oh yeah, I don't know who let the Patriots get Derek Rivers. That just blew my mind.
It's a crime
to see that to see him fall that far, because he had kind of like for him it's kind of like the Javon Hargrave I guess timeline where you see Javon Hargrave, he blows up just everybody in his way at South Carolina State, goes to the Shrine game, blows those guys up too. Then Sheldon Rankins gets hurt on the second day of the Senior Bowl last year. So Javon Hargrave comes up, doesn't have a jersey number, has nothing on his helmet. And I remember his first snap, he destroyed Vidal Alexander from LSU, just dominated him. He had a good game, goes to the combine, blows up the combine, and then like when you're checking off literally every single box that you could hope for a small school defender, and then he comes into the NFL and he has maybe the first month or so was a little bit rough for him, but when he started to get used to the speed of the game, I mean, he was just dominating dudes. And that maybe the NFL will learn from that same mistake, because Derek Rivers, he kind of had the same exact path. I mean, at the Senior Bowl, in the one-on-one drills, no one could block him. He had a good game, and then at the Combine, he blew it up. So to let Bill Belichick get Derek Rivers, it's just a crime. And when
especially
he's
in the
going
fourth round as well, when the Patriots had no picks, it's like, oh, you basically just gave him like a top
they
30.
traded back
Yeah.
from their initial spot in the third round and still got him, which just made me sick. And when you look at what they have on the interior, they already have Alan Branch, Vincent Valentine. I think Malcolm Branch is like a top 12 defensive tackle in the league. Alan Branch is one of the better nose tackles in the league, and Vincent Valentine is an athletic second-year player. So those are going to be guys that can wreak havoc on their own, and then you just have the speed even off the edge. That was the one that just bugged me the most. And then I think Jaleel Johnson from Iowa, he got drafted to the Vikings at the start of the fourth round. And with Sheriff Floyd, unfortunately, his career might be over after having, I guess, a botched knee surgery. I think Jaleel Johnson is in a place where he can step right in next to Linval Joseph and get those starting snaps.
One last thing I'll ask you, as you watched like all the nose tackles or all the defensive tackles last season, is there any hope for Bushrod inside at guard, or do you think it's not built for him, with him looking to be the starter with Ted Larson on the other side of the interior for the Dolphins, and who knows if Pouncey will be back? But I mean, I can imagine you saw a lot of defensive tackles have their way against Miami.
Yeah, that interior offensive line, I think, is going to be a problem. Just because, I mean, I thought that they were going to pick Forrest Lamp at 22. And I mean, obviously, like they picked Charles Harris.
And they could have had Feeney in the second round as well.
Right,
that made sense.
It's going to be just a major weakness for them. I don't think Bushrod. I don't think Bushrod's is that guy that you want to start on the inside, and Ted Larson is basically a fake name. So
you're hoping he like retains his form of last year, where he was a below average guard, and that was his best year of his career. It's like,
yeah,
I don't know. It's
Mike Pouncey, like, what's his problem? He's always dinged up.
Yeah, I think there's like some hip stuff. So it was like last year they were talking about him coming off IR or PUP, and then he went to IR, and that was like in the middle of the season, and then he's like still not good. It's like, yeah, it's weird. But who knows?
You got Tunsil, and I don't think Juwan James is as bad as people make him out to be.
Okay, I would disagree. I think he's pretty rough. And he's also just like, he's interesting in terms of like, I think he was really good his rookie season, or until he had to move to left tackle. But he's an interesting player in terms of he's like a finesse right tackle, which is really interesting. And he's kind of works best in space. Like he recovers well with his length. But when he's had to play left tackle, he started getting beaten on his inside a lot. And now he's like, he like sits in a bit too much, and he's like a bit too just hesitant and gets beaten that way. And just in the run, you have to run like outside zone, and even then, he's not like great at that. So there's kind of like, not like dings on him, but like I think he's I think he's like a capable like pass protector with his length. But they missed pretty bad, like picking him over Morgan Moses.
Yeah, the first round that was not a good pick, but
yeah,
you got Tunsil. Tunsil looks like he could be a beast at left tackle.
We just need to have like every draft prospect put out a bong video before us to draft any good players. But I don't know. Yeah, I haven't been too fond of many of the Dolphins draft picks the last two years, outside like Tunsil. Really, I like Harris as well.
Ajayi.
Oh yeah. But that was like 3 years ago now. That was quite, yeah.
Oh yeah, we're coming up this is year 3 coming up. Wow.
Yeah. And then like the staff benched Ajayi week 1. And it's like, it's weird. Yeah. It's like, it's kind of interesting, like the narrative around Ajayi, like now he's like one of the top 100 NFL players or whatever from that weird list the players make. But
Yeah.
then there's no kind of conversation about like why he got benched, because it's all like apparently his attitude to the competition of Foster. So it'll be interesting. And like Maxwell getting benched week 4 for like having to. There's going to be some interesting things with this coaching stuff, like how they adjust to like dealing with egos and like players' attitudes, and if they're like, I mean, they're now a second year or like head coach. I think Gase like has some big things, like especially game planning. Like the first quarter of every game, they just got demolished. So it's like Gase is getting a lot of hype, but I think he's definitely got like room to grow. Which I think if you're like a Dolphins fan, is like maybe the biggest positive is like, oh, they got to the playoffs and there's like a ton of shit he can improve on.
Yeah.
Like not benching Ajayi week 1, which is one. But I don't know.
Hopefully they'll be able to protect Tannehill. I think he's a little bit underrated right now.
I think that it's kind of swinging the other way now, where there's like enough kind of talk about him, and we're going to see like so many quarterbacks die that he'll just naturally rise up the ranks that way. How are you feeling about the Falcons coming off into next season then?
I'm
Still
ready.
not recovered.
I keep trying to tell myself that I have recovered, but then I just think about it like, man, they were destroying them, and but I mean, they should be a good team. I think people are getting a little bit ahead of themselves, saying like this defense is gonna be like some top 5 unit. I would still like to see it happen before I get like overly excited. But just when you look at the names on defense, they're getting Derek Shelby, who you guys obviously know back, who was before he tore his Achilles, he's really starting to come into his own. And then Desmond Trufant will be back, and they added Terry Poe and Duke Riley and Tack McKinley in the draft. So it's going to be a fun team, a fun defense to watch, just because everyone outside of defensive tackles on that team runs at least a 4.5. So that's going to be fun. The offense should still be extremely explosive with Steve Sarkisian calling the plays, just because there's so much talent on there. It would be outside of a season-ending injury to Matt Ryan or Julio Jones. They should be in the top 3 offenses again. So it'll be fun, but it still sucks just knowing how close they were and not being able to get it done. But that's what being a Falcons fan is like.
How do you think Shanahan's going to do in SF?
I think it's gonna be fine. I have a conspiracy theory that John Lynch does nothing and he's just kind of a figurehead, and Shanahan's running the whole thing. But that's another crazy Charles conspiracy for another day.
Ian and I were like big Shanahan proponents for the head coaching job 2 years ago. So at least the Falcons did like their one job of like getting Kyle the head coaching gig. That was the real destiny of that team last year. That was the only aim.
Yeah,
so,
and
that works out.
I don't think anyone expects them to be good. I've seen people say that the 49ers can win the NFC West. I'm like, dude, their defense is still awful. Brian Hoyer's still their quarterback, and I'm sorry, like their best receiver by far is Pierre Garçon, and that's just not going to cut it. But I do think that Shanahan can cook up enough magic where maybe they make some games with the Seahawks or the Cardinals a little bit interesting.
Yeah, they can maybe get like 4 or 5 games.
Yeah.
Maybe. But I mean, yeah, he made a Browns team look serviceable. That like Hugh Jackson couldn't, after like so much hype about Hugh Jackson coming into that season. It'll be interesting. It should be an interesting season, at least for like the new coaches, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to see what this Vance Joseph team looks like out in Denver.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting. I'm surprised Wade Phillips didn't stay with him, because like Vance loves Wade. So that was like, maybe he just doesn't want to like have that pressure. But then he's not calling the defense anyway. So I thought that was kind of strange.
Yeah, so did I.
It'll be interesting. But all the players seem to love Vance. And I think that like the defense probably was better for Miami than offensively, even if they were like overall being like one of the worst rush defenses. Like I think they did pretty well with the players they had, and like made pretty good adjustments as the season went on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it'll be interesting. I think like that Denver team is, I guess like it just has to be the defense. Like offensively, they're going to be pretty muddy. Is there any other teams you want to talk on, or should we let you go?
That's all I got for today. This has been fun though.
Thanks for joining us. Make sure you follow Charles and Justin's podcast, Setting the Edge, on their website, and all the team updates there. Is it like the AFC East is like the 5th or 6th division you're going through, isn't it? So a bit.
I don't remember. I'm about to post this Packers one actually as soon as we get off of here. So we will have wrapped up the AFC North and the NFC North, and then we'll have a little NFC North podcast coming out tomorrow. So
cool.
I don't remember which division is next. I'll have to ask Justice.
Well, make sure you should listen to it every episode anyway. So, and eventually you'll be surprised with an AFC East one. And make sure you check out the site as well. And when the season comes back, Beach Report 1000, you will know about it with Ian. So you make sure you check out Charles' stuff on the nose tackle or defensive tackles there. For this show, it's MiamiPod, themiamipod.com, all that kind of stuff. So thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week. Goodbye.